Y'all remember the scene in My Hero Academia when All Might tells Deku that if Todoroki was to have inherited One For All, he would have been unstoppable? Well, I do, because I just recently rewatched all of My Hero Academia, and I actually wanted to discuss this with you guys, so let me know in the comments down below if you guys end up agreeing with my take on this what if, and just enjoy it overall. Leave a like and do all that basic YouTube stuff. That said, enjoy.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
Okay, so before I start this, I firstly just need to say that this is genuinely unrealistic. So first we have to cover our basic. First of all, I think that Mirio would have definitely inherited the quirk of One For All, if not for Midoriya stepping in the way and impressing All Might the way that he did. However, let's just say that for the what if sake, that doesn't happen, and instead All Might decides to wait until after the entrance exam for UA would have concluded, to see if maybe there's some other candidates, right? He waits, and ultimately he would end up being impressed with two different contestants. One being Katsuki Bakugo, and the other one being Todoroki Shoto, right? And the reason that he would end up picking Shoto was obviously because Bakugo seems a little mean, plus Shoto got in through recommendation. Also, there's the fact that his father, Endeavor, is the number 2 hero. All Might ponders asking Endeavor if he would be willing to let his son train under him, but ultimately based off how their interactions have gone throughout the time that he has met Endeavor, he decides that he would probably not like doing that. So instead, what I'm going to be saying ends up happening is that after the entrance exam would finally finish, All Might would actually end up talking to Todoroki afterwards. Now, normally in the original, I definitely think that Todoroki would reject this offer, but I think that genuinely speaking, because of how much hatred he actually bears for his father, he would actually accept it, just trying to be petty towards his dad, to train with All Might, and he would do so for about 1 week before UA starts, because I'm pretty sure that's about how much time would have passed. Now, after all that would have ended up happening, I definitely think that during that week, seeing as Todoroki is born with a quirk and he doesn't view One For All as the most special thing in the world, I think that he definitely would end up getting access to something like full cowling, as well as 10% of it off rip. Plus, with him already having 2 quirks, they would get major amps, and we're talking about insanely powerful amps. Like, his ice would become even colder, even stronger, and even harder to melt. We're talking like basic fire can't melt his ice anymore. We're talking like it has to be flames of his own, like basically to the point where only his flames could melt it, or that of like cremation at like 100% power. You know what I mean? That's the only thing that could melt his ice. So Todoroki's new quirks are just majorly amped, and they're just a lot harder to control. In general speaking, I think that Todoroki would generally be back to square one when it comes to not exactly understanding how to control his quirk. That said, what I think would pretty much end up happening is that we would go in, and in the story, everything would immediately start normal. Obviously, with the first arc in the story being the quirk apprehension arc and it having no stakes, I think that Todoroki overall would end up performing very decently. However, due to the fact that he now has full cowling's aid, he would end up actually getting first in this said exam. After this, I think that the battle trial arc pretty much remains constant, seeing as Todoroki has no real reason to amp anything up, and his opponent still wouldn't change. One major change to the story, however, would be that Izuku would pretty much be bopped out of it, without Izuku ending up getting access to something like, you know, One For All. And seeing as we don't generally want to keep Izuku around for the sake of this what if, I'm not going to make him turn into a villain or become a vigilante or any of that. Instead, Izuku just kind of remains doing his own thing, and Todoroki would just be doing his own thing as well. The story would be a little bit different, but ultimately once we would finally get to the USJ arc portion of things, once Kurogiri would teleport in and the stakes would finally be high for the first time in the story, generally speaking, I think that Todoroki would be more than willing enough and capable enough to actually end up destroying all of the people that were there in said moment, right? Like when it comes to when it comes to the area that he was taken to, the rock slide formation, I think that Todoroki would have absolutely no problem using his ice and decimating them. Now, Todoroki doesn't want to use his fire anymore. However, after having a bit of a pep talk from All Might and how he would tell him that, that quirk is his and how he can't really just be thinking that his whole life, he has to move on from that, I think Todoroki would slightly begin heating up to the idea of using his fire quirk. Ultimately, though, I think that eventually we would get to the point in time where All Might would pretty much be caught off guard by the Nomu. Just like in the original, he's getting suplexed through a portal. Kurogiri at this point would be trying to close it, but it's at this point that Todoroki would arrive and freeze Kurogiri in place. Kurogiri can't move, and because of that, Todoroki would easily be able to shoot flames at Shigaraki as well, causing Shigaraki to get like 3rd-degree burns and be taken out completely. Following this, Todoroki would be able to help out All Might in defeating the Nomu by simply freezing it. And All Might would then finally turn towards Todoroki, and I feel like we would probably get some sort of scene where All Might thanks him, and this would be like the first very OP showing of Todoroki doing something. I think that genuinely speaking, what would end up happening after this is that they both would end up being taken to Tartarus. And because All For One's grand master plan was Temura Shigaraki, I think that there's definitely going to be some sort of Tartarus breakout arc, right? However, because Todoroki is a UA student, he's not going to be a part of that, and that would be taking place most likely during the 1 week break that they would have before the UA Spool Festival would end up actually taking place. Now, when it comes to this, Todoroki would easily be able to get first place during the race. When it comes to the cavalry battle, he would do remarkably well. And then when it comes to the 1v1 battles, such as Todoroki versus, Sero, he would easily be able to take him out, controlling his temper a whole lot easier than he would in the canon, and not showing off too many of his cards, trying to make sure that he impresses people and lets them know that he's here, and also trying to send the message across to his father that he's training with his own rival, you know what I mean? Following this, Todoroki, considering he doesn't have to face off against Midoriya this time, would end up facing off against Todoroki. Todoroki, being a short-spoken person and somebody that doesn't really answer or talk a lot, I think wouldn't even answer Shinso's question and thus would be able to defeat him. If he does answer, I definitely think that Todoroki would still be able to break out, however, because of One For All's properties of it being quirk that has vestiges inside of it. Continuing the story, however, once we get to the battle between Todoroki and Bakugo, even if Bakugo was to only have to deal with Todoroki using nothing but his ice side, I think that the battle would be way too overwhelming for Bakugo, and the ice would just be way too powerful. Plus, the ice is the natural counter to Bakugo's quirk, considering that he needs to sweat. All Todoroki has to do is to change the environment, pretty much, and Bakugo Katsuki would pretty much be rendered useless. Almost. This would lead Todoroki to being the winner of this arc, and following this, we would have Endeavor still being the one who would end up mentoring Todoroki. Not because of the fact that Todoroki doesn't have a mentor like Gran Torino at All Might, but because All Might thinks that he should probably hash things over with his old man, and he tells him that his next internship's also going to be with another man that he's very close with, his own master, Gran Torino. So for now, he ends up going with his father Endeavor, and eventually we would end up having the scene in which Ida would unfortunately end up going after the hero killer. This time, unfortunately, because Shigaraki was still in prison and didn't end up approaching the hero killer Stain, we wouldn't have the Hosu City incident to happen, right? And so all the members of the vigilante squad that end up joining later, sorry, not vigilante, but the League of Villains, they don't end up actually joining. That's a major impact to the League of Villains power rankings, and so because of that, they don't get access to somebody like Dabi's services or Togo or Spinner or whoever else ended up actually joining because of that, right? And so what we would pretty much end up having happen is that the hero killer Stain arc would end up being a very tragic one, where I see things having a very big impact on Todoroki, whereas he gets to see the real impacts of villains in this world, and Todoroki would swear revenge towards the hero killer, thinking to himself and beating himself up over the fact that he wasn't there to help him, knowing that he was actually about one town away. Todoroki definitely feels the repercussions of this, and I think that UA school would go in a 1-month shutdown because of the fact that Ida's life was lost. However, due to the fact that it wasn't really Yue's fault, the reason that Ida died, I think that they would be able to argue back, and the family of Ida themselves would be able to say that it's not Yue's fault, right? Ultimately, I see them jumping back into the final exams arc, and during this arc, what I genuinely speaking would see happening is a one-sided complete stomp from Todoroki and Momo versus Aizawa. And you guys might be like, wait, what? Are you serious? No, I'm not. See, this whole time, Todoroki has been so overly reliant on his quirks that I don't think that Todoroki would actually be able to defeat Eraserhead this time around. In the original, we get a more level-headed and different personality Todoroki, and without access to his powers, that the main thing that he's been training on for all this time have been focusing on his hand-to-hand combat skills and simply just improving his access to full cowling, now having access to an easy 17 full cowling percentage, I think that Todoroki having too much reliance on his quirk would end up being his downfall, and himself and Momo Yaoyorozu would end up taking an L. Following this, in the original story, we end up seeing the Forest Training Camp arc. And this one wouldn't really be too relevant until we finally get to the Vanguard Action Squad invasion. However, this time around, ladies and gentlemen, that arc simply does not take place. Todoroki being in the mix, All For One actually genuinely has to be a bit more careful with how he does things. He does plan to take that out, but without all the extra members that they would have in the original, there's no real reason or way that the villains could actually attack them in that point. So we don't get the Hideout Raid arc, and All Might still doesn't end up facing off against All For One. Instead, we have more time for this heroes all to relax and Todoroki to grow as nothing more than a student, eventually leading us to the Provisional Hero License arc, where eventually what would end up pretty much going down is that we would end up getting a scene in which Todoroki pretty much would face off against Inasa. However, going back to all the training and all the new lessons that he's learned from All Might, he would end up backing down and letting Inasa be the winner, ultimately leading to Todoroki actually passing this time. And because there is no Deku in this story, there is no reason for Bakugo to be upset when it comes to him being the cause of All Might losing his quirk. So no Deku versus Kacchan. Because of that, we then immediately jump into the Overhaul arc. And due to the fact that Izuku going with Sir Night was the reason that, he was able to actually see Night Eye and the Aries situation was all started, I genuinely think that All Might, even though he would definitely want him to go with Gran Torino, I think that Todoroki having an encounter with Mirio, the first person who have actually been capable of attacking him and damaging him, would actually cause Todoroki to want to go over to his agency, ultimately leading to him patrolling with Mirio after being chewed out by Sir Night Eye and being told that he must make him laugh, eventually would lead to Todoroki showing absolutely no chill and ultimately just straight up freezing Overhaul, leading to the ultimate defeation of many of the villains that we would get in the My Hero Academia story very, very early on. Genuinely speaking, because All For One has to take much longer in order to prepare his villains and gather more people to his actual cause, I genuinely speaking think that about 1 extra year would pass, meaning that Todoroki eventually, after all this time of training constantly, of using his quirks every other day, would get to a level of power where not even All For One himself could actually end up defeating Todoroki by himself. So I genuinely speaking think that even if All For One was to eventually rally up all the members of the Vanguard Action Squad eventually through different means than he would in canon, Todoroki would still ultimately be able to put the boot on All For One, and that entire thing that we would have gotten in the original would be completely stomped out. See, it's a really, really good thing that Deku is the one that ended up getting access to the quirk, and we got a story of somebody who doesn't know how to use his powers correctly would have actually been, considering that if anybody such as Mirio or Todoroki or even Katsuki Bakugo got access to the quirk, we'd be singing a completely different tone than the one that we have in the original, considering the fact that many of these characters I genuinely speaking think would level up so much faster than Izuku Midoriya, and I genuinely think that they would just get down to business a lot faster than in the original. Let me know what you guys think about this what if in the comments down below. And for those of you that usually watch my content and are like, yo, why is this video so short? It's just because I wanted to take my own spin on like shorter what ifs instead of always having to do these long format 1 hour ones. Let me know what you guys thought down below in the comments, and let me know if you guys would want to see a video such as what if Bakugo received one for all, or what if Kirishima received one for all, or things along that nature. Just different characters receiving one for all in general. That said, it's been your boy Xehther. Remember one thing if you don't remember anything at all from this video, and that's that God loves you. And with all that out of the way, ladies and gentlemen, it has been your boy Xehther, and I am out. Peace.